We have three guests that are going to be on the same call tonight, and those three guests are Jim Dow, Paul Olsen, and Richard Taylor. They have a new project that they're coming out with called Project Enterprise. You can go out to the website and take a look at it. It's called projectenterprise.space. But what makes it so interesting and such an honor to have these three gentlemen on the phone is that these are the three original people that built the Starship Enterprise under the direction of Gene Roddenberry for Star Trek The Motion Picture. These guys are the people that bring the Hollywood magic alive. They have got unbelievable bios, which I'm going to ask them to each talk a little bit about themselves. We're going to have some fun talking about their new project. We're going to talk Star Trek. We're going to talk all kinds of different things tonight. And it's such an honor to have them here. They're quite busy with everything that they're doing, but they took time to be with us for a couple hours. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get these guys on the line. Guys, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe radio show.
Well, hello. Everybody's sitting here waiting for the other one to speak.
Who do we have on the line, guys? Who's who? I can hear y'all, but I guess I can't put I can put a picture to a face, but not who's on the phone.
Well, you have three of us. There's myself, Richard Taylor.
Richard, good to meet you.
Good to meet you. And then there is
me, Jim Dow.
Jim, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
And Paul Olsen. Hi, Pat.
Hey, Paul, and thank you for putting this all together. I know I emailed you several months ago, and I know all of you are quite busy. But, again, it's an honor to have you here, and I want to thank you for taking some time tonight to be with us and our listeners.
Well, thank you for having us on the air, and we're really pleased to be here.
Thank you.
Well, you're more than welcome. You know, I have been a Star Trek fan for so many years since I was a young kid, and to see where it started out and to where it is today. And when I came across your website and started talking with Paul and seeing what you guys are doing, which we definitely want to get a lot of details on, and then found out that you guys actually created the Enterprise for the movie, for the original, for the motion picture. I mean, you're the guys, you're the Hollywood guys that make it real, that give it the reality and the feel to make you feel like you're really there.
Yes, this is Richard speaking. Excuse me.
Trying to speak.
Yeah, trying to speak. Yes, for the audience to understand clearly what we did and who we are, when the Paramount decided to make a feature film of Star Trek, the franchise, we were the people that were contacted to do the special effects for the movie. I was the art director at Robert Abel and Associates, and we were hired to do the effects. And Jim Dow was head of the Magicam Model Shop, which was a division of Paramount Pictures. And Paul was an independent artist here in Los Angeles, airbrush artist, and so forth. So we were hired to design the Enterprise, and as a part of the models, I mean, again, for that feature film, there were multiple of models. There was the Enterprise, of course, kind of the jewel of the whole thing, and one of the most iconic images in the world as far as science fiction goes. And then there was the dry dock and the Space Office Complex, the shuttle, the work bees, the Vulcan shuttle, and the Klingon ships. So we basically designed and built all those models. We're focusing right now on the prize because we have this project that Paul really championed because of him speaking at Star Trek convention and so forth, and just this incredible assault on him by saying, gee, could we ever see the real model? We have to see the real physical thing. And so that was kind of the kernel of it, and he approached us about the potential. Let me fill you in a little bit more in the sense that I'm the vice chair of the Visual Effects Society, and I've been involved in special effects since the early 70s, and I actually directed the effects for Tron, the feature, and and have been involved in many films and things that have been computer simulated. And as you know, the majority of miniatures and things that you see in feature films today are computer simulated.
Right, right.
And back in the analog era, where we were in 1978 and 79 when we made this model, everything was done by hand. And so the processes we used to make a physical model, to design it and build it and to photograph it, and this was right at the time that the photographic techniques that were being evolved from Star Wars, were evolved. So there was new ways of shooting models and so forth. So we had to work within the framework of that. And for those listeners out there who are not familiar with physical models, to see an actual physical model that's 8 feet or 10 feet long, you don't see that very often. So that was our goal in this project, is to see if we could rebuild one or build one for a venue that could travel to Star Trek conventions and or to wherever someone wanted to see it. So that's where we began on this.
Very interesting. When you were brought on board for the project, had you done anything else, for Gene Roddenberry, or did he just go out and look for the best of the best and you guys came up?
Oh, wait, this is Jim.
Hey, Jim.
I had come off of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I did all the spacecraft and the mothership.
You probably saw him get off of the spacecraft in the movie.
Yeah. And actually,
he's been trying to get back ever since.
Yeah. Actually, backing up, my first film was Silent Running with Doug Trumbull and Bruce Dern. It was the
an amazing movie that never gets enough recognition.
That's right. If you're up at 3 o'clock in the morning, so you might catch. So I did Silent Running. I designed the drones and the spacecraft. And then I went on to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and 2 years of work on that. And then coming off of that, I joined a company called Magicam, which was just getting started, a subsidiary of Paramount Pictures, and they hired me to put together the model shop, and then we picked up Star Trek, which at that time was to be a television series, and then after about 6 months or so, it morphed into the motion picture. So, and that was when Richard came on board.
Now,
I can tell you,
go ahead.
That Star Trek the feature was a direct knee-jerk reaction to the success of Star Wars.
Yeah.
And all that they were prepping to make a new television series, they said, well, wait a minute, we'll just turn this into a feature.
Yeah, because they were TV people anyway.
Right.
Star Trek was a TV.
Yeah, exactly.
Was that a huge move for them at the time? I mean, was it kind of like you said, Richard? It was a knee-jerk maneuver. Was it something where they just shifted gears immediately and said, "Got to get on board"?
Yeah, I think so. In a way,
it took a couple of weeks. There were a couple of weeks where we were kind of hanging, waiting for a decision, and then it happened, and it happened pretty fast.
Well, all projects, film projects, are hinging upon the script, and that is the key thing. For them to get a script or to adapt one of the ones that were being evolved for the television show, we all need that to kind of build upon, to know what you're building. And my job on the film was to start the whole movie and do a lot of other aspects of it. And so wherever and however that decision, they tried to use as much that they had developed to roll it into a feature. But I must say that Jim and I and those of us who were brought in to the feature and looked at the models that were being built or that were being designed, the pieces that were being built, was embarrassing at best. I mean, you would have been out of the theaters, especially if you're talking to an audience that had seen 2001 and most recently, everybody's mind was Star Wars, which was, you know, a whole new era of science fiction filmmaking. You know, that was the opening Pandora's box of the next generation of science fiction.
When you guys, let me, if I could ask you, I've got so many questions, and listeners have sent in so many questions for you. When they were going to do a new, was it going to be called Star Trek? Like the next series or something was the next TV show before the movie. Of course, the Enterprise has got its iconic shape, which it still does today. I saw some drawings and actually some models of something that looked similar to the Enterprise right before the motion picture had the saucer, but the nacelles looked quite different. Was there another interim ship that was going to be used, or a refit ship that was going to be used for the new TV series, and then you guys came in and said, we need to build this, you know, we need to build the Enterprise, and went ahead with the design on that?
No, there was a ship under construction that was a very small model. It was only 5 feet long or so. But it was a reiteration of the original ship.
Okay.
Which at that point had already been given to the Smithsonian. And it was strictly television quality. It wouldn't stand up under film. So when it went to feature, we knew that we had to build a new ship, and it became the refit Enterprise as an element of the script.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think I can answer a little bit more in that realm. So when I was approached at Abels I was the main art director, designer at Abels, and it became my job to look at what models had to be rebuilt and so forth. Number one, everything that we had to build for these models had to stand up to the scrutiny of the new level of detail that was going into photography, of shooting models and doing matte paintings and everything else in the motion picture industry. So the techniques that were evolved during Star Wars, which was the models were on motion control bases, the lighting systems were built into the models were of a bigger scale. Even though we call them miniatures, we make them big so that you can control depth of field and get close to them and get detail.
And they were shooting larger format.
Right, and we were shooting larger format film. So the models that were going to have to be made for the feature were going to have to be made from scratch, and we're going to have an incredible attention to detail because of the photographic techniques that we were going to use. Putting motion blur into all the stuff that was evolved, at Star Wars. And, Jim and I, and we know, it's a small community in a sense, John Dykstra and Richard Edlund, and we all know each other in a way, and we did back then. But again, this was the analog era. Everything was shot on film and either optically composited or composited in camera by making multiple exposures or multiple passes on a model.
With magnetic tape controlled computers.
Right, magnetic tapes or punch cards controlling computers.
Yeah.
So the Enterprise model that we had to build, we built it from scratch, and my design was, I went, oh my God, great, I'm going to get to design the Enterprise, and I had all kinds of ideas about, making a new shape and new design, but when I finally did meet with Gene, he basically laid the law down that it had to have that same configuration. You had to have because that configuration is a signature of Star Trek. You can see that model in profile, in silhouette. You can see it from a distance, and you recognize it. I mean, it's one of those icons in science fiction that people just immediately recognize. So he said it must remain that configuration, but I could change proportions. I could, redesign it and make it more modern in ways, and that's what I tried to do, but I tried to keep it in the design framework. I made it bigger, more elegant. I made it more Art Deco. One of the main things that we redesigned were the nacelles, and the general shape of everything, and we really looked at all the functions that it had to do in the film and built those things into the model, like the ion engine on the back of the saucer, and just details here and there that were a part of the script. The Vulcan shuttle was going to have to dock at the back of the bridge. Those kind of things were all built into the design.
Wow. Did you do all the mold making and stuff yourself, guys? Did you do all that?
Yes, we did.
I'm looking online here, and just for our listeners, if you put Jim Dow Star Trek in and hit enter, look at the images, you'll see a lot of the stuff when you guys had the 70s haircuts with the beards. And there's tons of pictures, and there's a picture of Jim with the Enterprise up on its side working with the, I think that coil thing or whatever the thing is on the top, the blue dome on the top is. And the size of the size of this is huge.
Aviator glasses. I love it.
Amazing.
We actually invented some processes. The processes that we were devising, it was a matter of looking at what was coming down to us as far as what we were going to have to build and so on, and how are we going to do this, and making shells. And we bought a vacuum former. We started working with a company called BJB Plastics and they were experimenting with. We did a lot of experimentation with chemistries in the early years of urethanes. We wasted a lot of molds. There are molds that you go. If you know anything about molding, you start with a pattern.
Yes.
Very meticulously made pattern, and then you a mold box, and then you pour the mold. We were dealing with RTV silicone rubbers, and then you cast your part. And the materials that we were having BJB develop for us had to have certain properties, because first of all, we needed speed. We needed these things to
it's got to handle warp speed.
Yeah, right. Well, we needed to turn these things over rapidly so that we could move ahead. And so we were dealing with experimental urethanes at the time, and a lot of them just never went off, never cured, and consequently we would ruin a mold, and some of those things are still sitting in storage somewhere as gooey messes. But what I'm trying to say is that, yes, we were doing a lot of experimentation, and a lot of the processes that we invented are still in use today. Just as a sidelight, I went into a shop in Southern California and noticed a guy in the corner pouring open-face molds and silicone with BJB urethanes. And I walked over and talked to him about it, and he says, "Yeah, this is a process that some guys in Hollywood invented back in the 70s."
There are a lot of things about the building of the Enterprise that I think you'll find interesting. First of all, as I mentioned, the camera systems that we shot with could make repeated moves. So the camera would be on a motion-controlled rig and move past the model. First of all, the model was built so it could be armatured. And armature is what holds it into place from 5 different sides. So the left side, the right side, the rear, the front, and the bottom. And you support the model based on what the shot is you're shooting. Mm-hmm. And all the electronics that are inside the model, all the lighting systems, all that, all have to connect through that armature or other ways of plugging in. So first there had to be this incredibly strong armature built that allowed us to support the model from these different positions. And by the way, I won't go off this too far off track here, but the Enterprise...
Oh, go on.
Go ahead. I want to hear it, man.
As far as designing a model, okay, I have a background in making models, and I've raced in the soapbox turbine as a kid. I understand. My dad was an Air Force pilot. Matter of fact, I graduated from the University of Utah.
I saw that.
Yeah, but my father was an Air Force pilot, and I know how things work. And the Enterprise is actually one of the most unbalanced objects ever in the history of science fiction. If you design something for outer space, you try and design it so that its center of gravity allows it to rotate. If you take a tin can in outer space or any object and let it go, it will spin around its own center of gravity. The Enterprise is an incredibly unbalanced object. It's so cantilevered. When you have that thing armatured through the tail, or through the lower fuselage, and that body goes out in front, and then the dorsal, and then that saucer on there, there's a huge cantilever there. The thing is trying to break off of the armature because it's very heavy, and so Jim and the guys had to make this incredibly strong armature underneath everything. And then built into the model are lots of electronics, and Jim can get into that. You know, there's fluorescent lighting, and at that time, LED technology wasn't around, so we used grain of wheat light bulbs to do all the small, tiny lights, maneuvering lights and the strobes and all that. They're literally the size of a grain of wheat or smaller, and they're little incandescent lights, and they can burn out, and they're very delicate. So to build all these electronics and things into this model was, at that time, really complicated. And
in fact, Paul Turner, our electronics guy, who was instrumental in lighting the interior of the Enterprise, went on after he finished with Star Trek. He went to Vandenberg Air Force Base and went to work for NASA, and ended up as a lead on the shuttle, the space shuttle instrumentation.
Wow. Well, and I used to be heavy into model railroading, and as you were saying about the grain of wheat bulbs, the tough thing too is if you don't have them lit up properly, to get them to be bright white is a problem in general. They always tend to have that yellowy, dirty look to them, and they get hotter than heck.
Yeah, they do. Well, they're incandescent, so
right.
They, it's distant.
We actually used another light. It was called an axial light, which actually has the leads coming off of both ends, and it's about half the size of a grain of wheat bulb.
Wow.
But the problem with all those, as you're well aware, is that those things get extremely hot.
Yes.
And especially when you over-voltage them. So to come into a model that was mostly plastic, it was a real nightmare.
I can imagine.
So the combination of lights that are inside the model are there for a variety of reasons. If we get to build this new version, you'll see that when the camera would go close by the windows on the saucer or anything, there was detail in there. There were literally transparencies of interior architecture. There's also transparencies of Mickey Mouse and some other little jokes we put in there. But if the camera literally got close enough to go by the windows on the saucer, there was detail in there because the windows were 1/8-inch plexi, polished out, and then those fluorescent tubes were in there backlighting all these little detailed transparencies. So we hid some other little things in there, treasures that I don't think we can mention on air, but anyway.
They call those Easter eggs now, guys.
That's right.
Yes, Easter eggs.
Easter eggs.
So, and then, of course, the grain of wheats were used all over other parts of it. And the technology of all that lighting rolled over into the dry dock, which they really did some fabulous lighting techniques on the dry dock. The big lights, the big hexagonal shaped lights that had like 50 or more little grain of wheat lights in them, stuff like that.
Unbelievable. A question I had for you, looking at all the pictures of you guys working on this thing, it seemed like it was in a pretty tight spot. I would assume it's a nightmare to even get around this thing and not doing whatever you have to do to make sure you don't bump into it or plow into it when you're working. It had to be a feat of just not damaging it.
Yes, well, all the craft were pretty delicate, especially when you're dealing with finishes that are camera ready. I don't know what images you're looking at, but when they got to we had quite a bit of room in the shop where we were under construction, but after they got to the shooting stage, things got pretty tight in there.
Well, in the spray booth too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things about the Enterprise that we really had to pay attention to is the final finish on it, and that's where the real detail shows up, both in the casting of the model parts, and the real tradition of making models with real detail started in 2001, really. The models, and again, certain models, details of certain models we make bigger. For example, where the shuttle docked with the Enterprise, that was a model that was, much, much bigger, so that you can get the detail in those kind of pieces. But the surface of the Enterprise, because of its big, smooth, curvilinear shapes, like the big, broad, curving shapes on the saucer, we needed to get detail on there, because if you don't put detail on the surface of something, it has no scale.
Right.
And that's when this whole paint job that Paul applied started to evolve. And Jim can tell you a little bit more about that, how we ended up coming up with a solution to make it look like,
Sure.
massive panels.
Since the ship was basically white, it became a process where, in thinking it through, these panels would have been manufactured somewhere and then transported to the assembly area, which is in space. And according to the batch of the paint or whatever the finishing material was on the panel, you place panels that are finished from different batches of paint or whatever they are, even if they're metal, side by side, you'll find a slight difference. So the idea was to indicate that by breaking the surface of the ship up, by painting it with pearlescent paints with pearl powder mixed into them, and varying the tint of the pearl ever so slightly from panel to panel. And in doing that, you break up the surface and create the sense of scale.
Wow.
Not only the color, the slight color variation, but the specularity changing a little bit from panel to panel. So Paul and the group worked out the basic design of those panels, the layout of those, and had to hand cut. I don't know how many of the listeners know the airbrush process, but before Photoshop, and in the analog era, when we made things by hand, when you airbrush something and you want to make a shape on paper, on illustration board, or anything, there's frisket paper or a masking material that you put it over the surface, and then you cut away the part where you want the paint to be, and you peel it away, and you spray, and then you peel that off, and then you do that multiple of times to make the different pieces fit together. Well, Paul was an expert at that, but this was a unique situation. Why don't you talk about that, Paul, a little bit?
Well, have you got? Do you need to take a break, Pat?
No, we're good for about another 18 minutes. So we got news, and then we'll let you guys take a break, and then we'll come back. We got 20 minutes before we got to do news.
Oh, okay. Well, when I went down to Magicam and met Jim, and we discussed what to do, and Jim suggested that I use the crescent pearlescent paints that he had used on a 1935 Ford that he had restored, and he used pearl paints on them, and he really liked their effect. So he suggested that's what I used, because I didn't have a clue. I had never airbrushed an object before. I'd only airbrushed album covers on either canvas or on illustration board. And while I was working out how to break up large parts of the model, I went out to LAX airport, and at that time, you could get right up to the airplanes. You could walk around them and everything, while they were in maintenance or outside of being loaded up.
How things have changed.
And yes, lots changed since then. But so I took my Polaroid camera out there, and I remember I got 10 packs of film, and they were 10 sheets of film in each pack. And I took 100 photos of engine nacelles and the tail parts of airplanes and all the panel breakups on airplanes to get a real feel for how at least aircraft of our time is constructed. And to be true, I was also procrastinating because after Jim showed me the model, I thought, what am I going to do with this? And so I have to admit, it took me 3 or 4 days of making any excuse I could to get what we call reference when you're an illustrator, to get ready to prepare an illustration. And but then once I got started, and Jim had already made a start with a girl named Susanna Swansea on the pattern on the saucer, which I described as the Aztec pattern, and it's since been known as that because that's what it struck me as. Mm-hmm. But Jim came up with this panel breakup on the pie-shaped sections of the saucer, and I really liked them. And so all I did was replicate them all around the saucer, top and bottom. And once so that got me out of a hole in a way because I didn't have to invent all that stuff. And then by the time I, was replicating all these patterns, these same Aztec patterns around the dish, and I'd spent time with the model, then I felt really confident and comfortable to carry on with the rest of the model and break it up any way I wanted.
Set up a theme.
Exactly, yeah. So that got me going.
Yeah.
Because it was daunting, I'll tell you.
Did the model, Paul, did the model come apart, or was it all one big piece?
Oh, no, it was all one big piece. All the only bits that came apart were the access doors for the various mounts.
Armatures.
Yeah, the armatures. So from the rear, from the bottom, from the left and the right, from the front. But other than that, no, it was solid as rock.
A lot of masking, I would assume.
Pat, I'll tell you what. There were a couple times when, I was working on the model, especially when it was upright, and I was working on on what I call the hull, but apparently it's called the secondary hull, or the fuselage. And if I dropped something and I picked it up and I stood up, a couple of times I banged into the dish. And when I banged into the dish, the whole model twanged, and then the cells were going boing, 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 boing. And I would just hold my breath. And I'll tell you what, if one of those things fell off, I'd have got in on my motorcycle and headed for the border.
So when they heard that sound, everybody turned around, huh?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Jim said, Paul, they would never have fallen off, and he's right. I mean, he built that thing.
It was solid.
He built that thing as ungainly as it is.
It was built to last because I knew that it was going to be around for a long time.
Yeah.
And it consequently went through shooting of all the way up through 5, I think. It went to ILM.
It went to ILM. The thing I would like to stress here is when it was finished, when it was at its most perfect state, before it ever went on a stage, before it was used and abused, it was stunning. And when it was shot for the original feature, it was shot on camera. There was very seldom was it ever shot against blue or green or anything. It was always shot pretty much against the background and the way the stars and things were put in. And so the matting process kept it from having to go through optical generations. Mm-hmm. Your audience probably, some may know what that is, but when we made films back then, you shot everything on film, and then to make different elements in a scene come together, you had to make mats for them. That means holds out the area so you can put an image into that area on the film. And everything went through an optical printer, and then we'd go to the lab and come back, and then you look at it. So everything was very slow, and changes were difficult to make, so you had to plan really well. It isn't like the digital era, and I know because I was there. I directed the effects on Tron, and that was opening the gate. So it's basically the model was made so beautifully, and it was shot really nicely in that feature. After the first film, it then went to ILM, and they basically had a different matting process. They shot a lot of green screen shots, so they sprayed the model with a dulling spray of all to be able, and also sprayed it so that they could make it fluoresce to pull mats on it in a way, and that really changed the look of the actual physical model. And of course, since then, it's gone through all kinds of degenerations, and it is owned by someone, and it would be impossible to rebuild it on the original armature in any way. You'd have to literally tear it down to the armature and begin again. So, our goal here is to build a new physical model that people could see, that could tour the world at Star Trek conventions, that would be displayed in a beautiful new way. We would use all of the latest technology to make, 3D printing, LEDs. It would be the same model with all the detail, a little bigger, but Paul's paint job would be there. And we'd put it in a pano that the audience could walk by or stand there and look at it all you wanted. That was either solid-state LED, possibly polarized LED, 3D, and we'd be projection mapping on the model. Projection mapping is, as you know, what's being done on buildings and architecture and all of that, where you're matching projection to an object and animating it. So we would use all those kind of techniques to display this thing. I think it would be just totally killer to rebuild this thing.
Oh, absolutely. And what Richard has designed, because he's working on state-of-the-art 3D technology, as a display for the Enterprise, the Enterprise will look like it's flying in space, and it'll just be absolutely a mind-boggling, beautiful, breathtaking display.
Well, I just got to say this, that when you watch the film, whether it's the director's cut or the original one, and I was a young kid when it came out. I remember, film going to the movie today has changed so much from when I was a young kid. I remember I think I was just in high school when I went and saw the motion picture. In the days of it would show on all 6 screens, in one theater. We were out in the middle of winter, freezing, waiting to get in, standing room only. And I remember when I saw that film for the first time. I'm from Chicago. I'm a native Chicagoan, so it was cold when we saw it. And even till this day, you believe that was real. I mean, you guys, the work that you did, everything that went into that, and again, my hat's off to you. That looks like the real thing. It is hard. It's the real thing.
Well, that conversation, as I said, I directed the effects on Tron and have been dealing with the evolution of that technology, and also watching what's been happening with the business of physical models in films. Mm-hmm. And 3D CG models have taken over 90% of what's going on, although the Academy Award this year was won by Interstellar, and those were physical models. And so Hunter Grassner and some other companies are still making physical models in movies, and they look great. And but the 3D CG world is so incredibly complicated now, and so much of what you see in these films are CG. I mean, in San Andreas and everything. I mean, everything is CG. So physical models still have this incredible realness to them that somehow people can still feel, and there's something about the physical model you still can sense. And so they are still being used. In the director's cut, Darren Dockerman, who's a friend of ours, who we've been using his 3D CG model, which he came from a analog era, and then he was a model maker that obviously just rolled into the new CG world, as many of them have. So they model in CG.
If you look on the website, you'll see all the representations of the Enterprise are done by Darren.
Yeah, that's his model, and we just put it in positions to make the logo and so forth. So anyway, that was used for the director's cut for those other scenes that were not in the original movie.
Gotcha.
Could you tell the difference, or did that?
No, I wouldn't.
When you saw.
No, I wouldn't have known that. The one, I mean, like you said, you said that your Enterprise was used through Star Trek V, Star Trek VI, which I think is one of the best movies. The Enterprise just looked very chalky. It had a very chalky appeal to it. You could tell it was a model. The detail that was put into the motion picture and even some of the other films. But VI, while it was a good storyline, the Enterprise was really kind of in the background. It was just it like it had to be there. It was pretty poor looking actually when they did the flybys with it.
Well, I think for people who like science fiction films and fans of all of that, to see a really beautiful physical model is something that is going away these days. So it would be really nice to build this thing and have it displayed here and there. Let
me ask you guys. We've got still another hour to go or about 45 minutes after the news. What's your thoughts on the new Enterprise and the J.J. Abrams film? What when you saw that for this first time, what did you guys think?
Well, as a designer, I liked it better than where they had gone, in that it went back to the configuration generally. It's all CG, so I watch films differently than you do. I watch them for specific details. I'll watch a film like 4 or 5 times. If I really like it, and watch it because I'm a director as well. I've directed lots of commercials and things, and so I'm watching it for different reasons. I thought it worked pretty well. I thought it worked Abrams is the next generation of storytelling in science fiction, and he's got 2 of the world's biggest franchise on his shoulders.
Right.
So, that's what it's going to be. But I like the fact that it went back to that configuration and paid some homage to the original idea.
What I found interesting in it, and I think it's when we look at the motion picture and so many of the the old school Star Trek stuff. Of course, the Enterprise always flies. It goes through space in its normal configuration. Even I think was it in one of the Next Generation films. Where the ship, in the first Abrams film, where the ship comes out of warp upside down. When you look at that, at first you go, what in the heck is happening here? But they really, from a physics standpoint, I guess if you want to call it, the Enterprise could fly anyway. It could fly upside down, right side up. It really wouldn't matter. It seemed like they took some liberties, but that was kind of cool.
Yeah, so that stuff I love. There is no upside down in outer space. And when we started on the feature, when I went in, because one of my jobs was to storyboard the movie, direct the storyboards, and my storyboard artist was Ed Verreau, who's now one of the top production designers in the world. So I had proposed, how we approached the Enterprise and the reveal of it based on the script. So I came back with the first rough boards, and I loved 2001, and to really make a science fiction film where you really pay homage to weightlessness, very rarely done and done well. And so I thought that the Enterprise should be in a dry dock that was hexagonal, elongated hexagon, or a cylinder hexagon. So there was no right side up or upside down on it. It wasn't a rectangle, an earthbound. And the Enterprise was inside of that, and when you very first saw the whole thing, it was upside down, and the whole shot is it just slowly rolling, and starting off from the very beginning saying there is. But the Enterprise, like all the other ships, when you watch, Star Trek or lost Ridley Scott. When you watch most science fiction films, the minute you cut to the ship inside and there's gravity and people are walking around, well, it's science fiction. Right. So, anything that applies to what could physically happen is out the window. The way things fly, the way they move, you can do whatever you want. So I thought what Abrams did was really cool in dealing with weightlessness and different kind of perspectives.
Yeah, I did too. I enjoyed the film. We're going to take a commercial break here, or a news break for about 8 minutes. Let you guys grab a little breather. But let's talk about, for our listeners, Project Enterprise.space. They can go to your website. They can help you fund what's going on. Everything about the project is out there, and I encourage our listeners to go take a look at it. Though I'm an IT guy by trade, the website is superior. It's beautiful. It drives great. It drives like the Enterprise. And I would love people to get behind you and support this, because this is an amazing thing that you guys are doing.
Well, thank you.
It is absolutely amazing. It's good. I want to talk about, Paul, about your book when we come back on the other side. Is the fundraising, is it going good? Are you guys moving in the right direction with this? Is this something we're going to see happen?
Yeah, well, we're only taking baby steps at the moment. I've just because I live in the UK, I've just come over to Los Angeles to get the ball rolling. Mm-hmm. And I've been working with my website designer, a lovely, very talented guy named Rob Goodyear in the UK, who lives out in a big converted barn out in the countryside, and he designed that website. And I'll tell you, it just every time I look at it, it knocks me out.
Well, and he did an outstanding. It's just so nice in the way it's presented, and the look it has, and again the work, the graphics are just beautiful on it, and I just so want to see this fly, and hopefully we can see your new ship at some of the Comic-Cons, and this is something that people need to see. This is all the work you guys put into it back then. It needs to come back out again. We need to see it again.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And then while we're still around, by the way, Pat.
Oh, you will be. You will be. You will.